If you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you. Hello everyone and welcome back to Foreign Fridays. Today's feature is the French movie Saint Omer. So briefly, Saint Omer follows Rama, a novelist who attends the trial of Laurence Coly at Saint Omer Criminal Court to write a modern-day adaptation of the ancient myth of Medea, a Greek tale in which a woman betrays her motherly instincts and kills her children. Directed by Alice DDiop-Diop, the film is based on the true story of Fabienne Cabot, who admitted to leaving her daughter to drown on a beach near the town of Saint Omer. The film focuses less on whether or not she committed the crime and more on, because of her state of mind, could she be held reasonably responsible for her actions. And prior to the murder, Cabot, like the fictionalized Laurence Coly, was a student pregnant by a much older white man, and the script borrows heavily from Cabot's testimony, detailing the years she spent isolated and alone in her lover's Paris apartment, fearful of the outside world. Alice actually traveled to the town of Saint Omer to attend the trial. On top of that, they also built a set in the real courthouse where the trial took place. And in addition, she has created a fictionalized alter ego by the name of Rama, an acclaimed history professor played by Kaje Kagami, to basically reenact the intense experience she had watching this trial. And although this is her film debut, Alice is a well-known documentarian, and her latest documentary, New, as well as Saint Omer, are currently available to stream on MUBI Canada. Feel free to use my link in the description box down below to get a free 30-day trial. So back to Saint Omer. So to mimic the experience she had watching the trial, Alice utilizes extremely long takes. And since there's no dramatic score or over-the-top effects, you really do feel like you're in the courtroom watching, right? You feel like you're with Rama, listening to Laurence speak. So I think it also helps that the actress who played Laurence Coly, Guzlagi Malanda, was exceptional in the role, right? To the point where the whole movie just could have taken place in the trial. She introduces Rama's character for several reasons. So the film begins with what at first seems like a dream about a young woman with a baby at the beach. We later find out that this young woman is indeed real and later be charged with killing her child. And the movie never actually shows Laurence placing her child in the ocean, nor does it reveal the final verdict, nor does it dispute Laurence's guilt. Instead, it tries to get us to understand why she did what she did by drawing parallels between Rama and Laurence to show basically why you can't really judge a person based on a single action. You really have to look at their whole lives and everything leading up to that point. How is it that someone kind of comes to the state of mind where they do commit such an act? So the first half of the movie basically, or the first part, is really dedicated to introducing us to Rama. And once the trial begins, Rama becomes a largely silent figure. So Rama is an acclaimed academic. She strives in circles that many black women could only dream of. As a professor, she's very confident, she's very engaging. Her students hang on to her every word. They literally look up to her. She feels seen, she feels heard, and she's clearly made a name for herself in this sphere. And this is not the same when she's at home with her family, right? So as a daughter, she appears very quiet, very shy, invisible, almost trying to stay out of the way. Her many accolades clearly do not impress her mother or her sisters, who pretty much scorn her for not really doing more around the family home. She's pregnant, but she's clearly not over the moon about it, and the only people that know she's pregnant is her husband, and she doesn't tell her family, right? She wants to keep it a secret. She has some anxiety about this. And the contrast between Rama as an academic and Rama as a daughter, it very much mirrors Alice's experience as an artist. So in interview, Alice basically explains how she is first and foremost French, that all my culture is French, and Rama's identity is basically from that point of view, right? So Rama, like Alice, was actually born and raised in France, and one of the reasons that the case became so popular is because of how well-spoken Laurence was. Like, people just couldn't believe it. And the undertone of just like racism, and if you read between the lines, right, like what a lot of people didn't understand, how is it that someone so well-spoken and so well-educated could commit such a crime, right? And if someone well-spoken and well-educated does commit such a crime, they certainly don't look like Miss Kaboo, right? Like, that's basically what a lot of these newspapers were saying. So both Rama and Laurence have felt like outsiders in their personal and professional lives. In the case of Rama, she was able to kind of break the glass ceiling and make it, right? Like, she's clearly able, she's made a career for herself. And so before the trial, we see Rama giving a speech on Marguerite Duras, the novelist and filmmaker who used her work to expose the horrors of colonialism and racism through a feminist lens. And we see Rama, she is at one of the most sort of elite academic places, speaking about this woman, Marguerite Duras. And the film basically shows Rama embedded in French culture and French history. And like Laurence, like Rama, Laurence had dreams of becoming an academic. However, during her trial, we find out that she was greatly demonized by her professors, right? Like, one professor took the stand and basically said, I didn't really understand why she wanted to study the scholars that she wanted to study. Why wouldn't she pick someone closer to her culture? Like, why is she drawing outside the lines, right? I was just trying to help. And as someone who attended Sorbonne University, like, for those of you who don't know, Sorbonne is like the Harvard of Paris. Like, it's one of the most elite institutions in the world. And the director, Alice DDiop, went there. And so I can't imagine the types of microaggressions she must have experienced at this institution. Like, I'm sure she has some stories. And even though this is a true crime, like, thriller, there is something deeply personal about the way she tells this story. And I think the reason that Laurence's testimony is so captivating is because we're seeing her through Rama's eyes. And Rama's character allows Alice to create an atmosphere where it makes it easier for the audience to listen to what Laurence has to say and listen to understand, right? Because the judges, the audience in that courtroom, like, they don't really care, right? They're listening out for contradictions. They want to get her to admit that she knew what she was doing was wrong and she was totally conscious of it. They don't really care about her state of mind. And I think having Rama in the courtroom, again, creates this kind of atmosphere, and having this gaze. I think if you took Rama's character out of it, it would be very difficult to listen to Laurence's testimony, right? It would, like, because who cares about a woman who drowned her children? Right? Like, why should we even hear anything that she has to say? It becomes clear as the movie goes on that this is not a woman trying to, dismiss what she had done, right? She's not trying to explain away this sort of heinous crime. And the other thing that Rama's character is utilized for is kind of giving the audience time and space to think about the testimony. Like, we do get breaks within, but there's really nothing to distract us, right? Like, Rama's life is not, like, again, she's largely a silent character. So when the glimpses we get into Rama's life, professionally and personally, it helps us kind of connect these two characters, right? She doesn't really have to say anything for us to understand where her anxieties are coming from. And it seems like the longer she watches this trial, the more anxieties that she has. Like Laurence, Rama feels isolated. She feels very disconnected from her family. And it's clear that, something about Laurence was unlocking sort of a deep darkness inside of her. And in an interview, Alice basically mentioned how while she was attending the trial, there were parts of her that she had to confront that she never thought she would. And it wasn't so much about the trial itself, but it was more about what the trial was kind of triggering. And I thought the score was really smart in the film because, you do get a sense of, it really emphasizes how Rama is like this woman just suffocating in her own thoughts, drowning in her own anxieties. And it kind of reaches a breaking point by the end of the film. Again, the movie's really clever because most of the testimony is based on like Laurence's life. And that makes her even more eerily relatable. Like, she's talking about her relationship to her family, her relationship to Mr. Dumontet. And there's a lot of parallels that, Rama is able to draw. We don't get a description of the actual murder until like towards the end of the film. And the whole time that Rama is watching Laurence, like, her gaze is fixed on her. And you're not sure if it's because she's she wants Laurence to look at her, or if she's really hoping that Laurence doesn't notice her in the courtroom. Again, like, you're in a predominantly white town, and so the last thing Rama wants is to like attract any attention her way. So it's not sure. So you're not sure if she's looking at her because she's watching the trial. She's looking at her like she wants her to see her. You know? The title of the movie says it all, like Saint Omer. Like, even if the people in this town wanted to understand her, they really can't, right? Like, they're so far removed from Laurence's life or Laurence's experience that there was never any hope here. And I thought the way that Alice dressed Laurence's character was really brilliant, because she kind of blends into the background. She's almost a painting, and she really is like, I think the costuming helped because she blends in. It's almost like you're watching a woman like slowly disappearing, and she's a woman that's been so broken down by her family, by her lover, that she barely ceases to exist, right? And I thought that was so, and I think that's why it made her testimony all the more captivating, right? Because again, she creates this atmosphere where you are able to kind of see where she's coming from. Laurence's background. So unlike Rama, Laurence was born in France. She came to France to study and become a lawyer. However, the more that she studied law, she realized she didn't want to become a lawyer, and instead she wanted to become a philosopher. And of course, this was the beginning of the end because her parents cut her off. And I thought it was really interesting that she wanted to study philosophy and not law, because philosophy is a subject riddled in the abstract, right? That's why her defense at times is, I don't know. And by I don't know, I don't think she meant like, I don't know. I think she just meant like, I don't know how to describe this to you in the confines of this courtroom or this language that's available to me. Laurence never denies that she committed the crime. However, she does not feel that she's entirely to blame, right? She cites witchcraft as being sort of the root cause of everything. And the judges totally dismissed the idea, right? In their mind, this idea was given to her by an overzealous police officer who, in maybe trying to understand this heinous crime, looked for an excuse outside of his understanding to help contextualize why she may have done what she did. And I thought it was really interesting that the judges, you know, they compared FGM, female genital mutilation, to witchcraft. So FGM for them would have been acceptable. And FGM is something tangible. It's something that you can actually prove, whereas witchcraft is not. And this whole trial, again, they're trying to find proof. They need something tangible that they can say, look, you did it. And so witchcraft doesn't really offer them an opportunity to do that, so they kind of dismiss it, right? Like, all these things are abstractions. The only thing the judges care about is that she committed this act, and the only thing they want to hear is that she knew what she was doing, right? They're not really interested in understanding why, unless it's something they can prove and see. And again, this is a cultural difference, right? This whole thing of, I don't know, it's like, even if I wanted to explain it to you, y'all are not going to hear me out anyways, right? Like, this is a lot deeper than this courtroom is able to kind of flesh out at the moment. Is Laurence a ruthless monster? So the parallel between Medea and Laurence is actually very important. So Medea killed her children to spite her cheating husband, and the act was basically one out of vengeance to take away her husband's male heirs as a way for punishing him for his crimes, right? So in Laurence's case, she did not kill her child out of vengeance. Like, she wasn't trying to get back at her lover. It was one really out of desperation and frustration, right? She really felt like she wasn't worthy of becoming a mother. And in real life, Cabu was dating a man named Michael Lafon, a 66-year-old sculptor. While they were together, she had 2 abortions and allegedly hid her 3rd pregnancy until it was too late to get an abortion. She gave birth to a little girl alone in this apartment, and Lafon allegedly showed little to no interest in the child. And in the movie, the man is renamed Luc Dumontet, and she met him through her aunt. So her aunt used to invite Mr. Dumontet over, as well as Laurence, as a way of impressing him. Like, look at my really impressive niece. But she grew jealous when she realized that this man was actually interested in her and not, not her aunt. And so he was 57 and she was only 24. While she's testifying, you can see Mr. Dumontet in the audience. He kind of comes off as this like solemn looking old man, and the courts clearly like sympathize with him because they probably felt like she was taking advantage of him. Like, they didn't really want to hear Laurence out. And according to Laurence, the 2 years prior to her daughter's birth were the worst years of her life, right? Like this kind of contributed to her final breakdown. And so when her father cut her off, Mr. Dumontet basically offered to pay for her studies, and Miss Laurence accepted, knowing that he was married with children. According to Laurence, Mr. Dumontet basically treated her like a dirty little secret. He kept promising that he would leave his wife, but of course he never did. At one point, even having her cater to a wedding and then sneaking her out the back door. One of the points Laurence makes is how in times of trouble, Mr. Dumontet would distance himself from her, saying that, what will you do about this? There was never what will we do? It was always listen, I ain't in this, you're on your own. And I thought that was pretty telling, because Mr. Dumontet just came off as a man who wanted to have his cake and eat it too. He wanted to provide for her without really being there for her. And his frustration with her, I felt stemmed from the fact that he couldn't really keep her content as her lover, right? The moment that she asked for more, she became difficult. She became a jealous woman. It's not his fault. He tried his best. And he kept making promise after promise. And it seems like he was trying to alleviate himself of the responsibility he had for basically contributing to her depressive state. And in the end, she felt less seen by him than, her own family. So even when the baby was born, he wouldn't actually admit that he was the father. He would admit that a baby lived in his apartment, but he wouldn't concede that he was the father of the child. And actually, when the child died, the reason he didn't go to the funeral is because he said it was too far, and he was complaining. He was like, how am I supposed to get there? It's what do you mean? Your child is dead, get your ass over there. Just came off I think he thought he came off sympathetic. He really seemed like a man who felt like he did everything he could. But he did everything he could as long as he didn't actually fundamentally had to change his life, right? The things he were doing, he wasn't really going out of his way. Her on his own terms. He was never willing to change his life for her, and he never would. And the relationship she had with Mr. Dumontet is very similar to the relationship she had with her family, right? These relationships that we have, especially, it all starts with family. That's why therapists are big on it all starts in your childhood, because it does. These kind of dynamics manifest themselves, as you get older. And so Laurence's father actually left her mother for another woman. And so growing up, Laurence appeared to want for nothing materially, but she was never really loved as a child. And she was more used as a pawn between her parents. And they both wanted her to become the poster child for everything that, everything that they wanted, right? They so badly wanted a daughter they could brag about, and they didn't really care about her well-being, right? They just cared about what she looked like. Make sure she's well-spoken, well-educated, gets a great job, but a job that we want. And the minute that she kind of broke away from that, they cut her off, right? They weren't really interested in hearing her out. They just wanted her to submit, right? That's a big part of it. They really wanted her to just do what they wanted. And I think that's why time and time again, she kind of submitted to Mr. Dumontet, because she's kind of used to that, right? The minute she steps out, people just kind of cut her off and treat her badly. It was really interesting that Laurence's father wasn't in the courtroom, right? As if the attitude is whatever she did, I'm not responsible. She chose to go her own way, despite everything we did for her, right? There is that kind of undertone, and this sentiment is very much shared by her mother. In one scene, Rama is having lunch with Laurence's mother, and Laurence's mother is sitting there, and she's citing how the newspapers are saying how well spoken her daughter is, right? So education and politeness are the two sort of signs that someone was really well raised. And the way that Laurence's mother was speaking about her daughter, she was almost saying well, I raised a good daughter. I'm not responsible for this. Whatever she did afterwards is not my problem. And she kind of has that same sentiment where it's listen, I don't really understand how someone so well educated could do such a thing, right? Whatever they did, it had nothing to do with me. So it really felt like her parents were kind of detaching from her in a way. And their idea of doing everything that they can was very surface level, very superficial. and it wasn't really getting to the root cause of the problem. And I was thinking, like, Laurence's family is such a contrast to like Rama's family. Like, Rama's mother clearly couldn't care less about her career. Her father is dead, so we don't really know what kind of relationship that she had with him. And so in Rama's case, it seems like her decision to become an academic and excel was in hopes of being seen by her mother, but it hasn't really worked. Seems like she's been pursuing her mother's love, but she's not really getting a reaction out of her. Whereas in Laurence's case, you know, she actually did play the perfect daughter. She did study, she did pursue the career that she wanted, and for that time, she did receive love, right? She fulfilled her obligations as much as she could. Like, there was one scene where Laurence is like, well, I called my mother as one should. You know, like, that's part of being a good daughter, calling your mother. Whether or not she really had any affection for her mother or her mother had any affection for her is irrelevant. Like, this is the part that she's been given, and this is the part that she played. But the minute she stopped playing, those phone calls stopped. Right? Like, they didn't really want to hear from her, and they didn't really like care for her too much. And so neither her parents or Mr. Dumontet, you know, cared about who she was as a person. And I think that's why Laurence at one point says that Lily's death was an abstract to Mr. Dumontet, because neither his love for her or his love for his daughter was real, right? Like, this whole thing about, I don't know, and this world of the abstract is like, I'm only as good as they want me to be. Laurence's testimony about her daughter's death happens towards the end of the movie, right? And she describes it as if reciting from the pages of a novel, right? She begins by stating how the moon acted as a spotlight and, you know, guiding her on the right path, and believing that the sea would carry her daughter's body away, as if, you know, the way she's describing placing her daughter in the ocean, it's almost as if she was, you know, retelling the story of Moses on the Nile. And in real life, actually, Kaboo stated that she chose to drown her child in the sea because she felt like the water was like amniotic fluid. And amniotic fluid is actually a clear, slightly yellowish liquid that surrounds the unborn baby during pregnancy. And the judges clearly were visibly upset. They're listening to her, and what the prosecutor was like, you know, you're not an actress on a stage, right? Like, you need to tell it to us straight. So her testimony, especially during this part, like, this is when the judges were really going in. They were looking for contradictions. They're saying, well, in the police report you said this, and now you're saying this. You know, like, what's really going on here? Like, what is it that you're trying to say? And I think the way in which Laurence describes her daughter's death, it's not like she's trying to avoid accountability. And actually, in an interview, the director Alice explains that basically because of colonization, the French that they speak is not like everyday French, right? It's closer to literature in a way. Like Laurence's whole testimony really does feel like something out of a novel. And so Alice observed during the actual trial that the greatness of her vocabulary and her expression allowed her to create a distance from the crime that she committed. And it's almost like she compared it to kind of like a great novel. Like, listening to this testimony was like reading a great novel. And so you become more engaged in understanding it than understanding what happened, how it happened, than the actual like heinous crime itself. So going back to Laurence's testimony, I think this detachment and the way she uses to describe it, like, I think what she was trying to express is that what I did was not a malicious act. Like, this was really coming from a place of mercy and grace. And she was trying to describe it in a way that she felt the judges would understand. Because again, what is the state of mind when someone is doing like something like that, right? Is she trying to kill off a child because it's inconvenient, or is there something else going on? And in the case of Laurence, you know, she might have felt that she was doing the child a favor, right? That's how broken she was, right? She felt like anything was better than, you know, forcing this child to have her as a mother. Like, that's how down bad she was. So the film ends the trial through a monologue from Laurence's defense lawyer. And in the speech, she basically expresses that any woman has the potential to become a Laurence Coly or a Fabien Kaboo, depending on their life situation, right? Depending on what led up to that point. And she explains something called chimeric cells, named after a mythical monster formed of different animal parts. So these cells are basically when a fetus when a fetus's cells migrate into their mother's organs and they remain in place, right? So no matter what happens, like a child will always be part of the mother. Like there's some link there, both physically and emotionally, that will never really separate. And she says that we women are all chimères. We carry within us the traces of our mothers, our daughters, who in turn will carry us. And in a way, she says that us women, we are all monsters, but we are all terribly human monsters. And the speech is actually so powerful that if you didn't actually know the ending of this movie, you would actually think that maybe she got off, like maybe they sent her to an asylum. Like it was a really powerful speech. And the decision to cut it off there, again, we're not interested in the verdict. We're interested in what happened, how it happened. And the movie kind of did its part, and it ended it there. There's no actual need for the verdict, and the reason for that is Laurence knows what she did was wrong, and she can't really fathom why she did what she did, and she's someone who's already like passed judgment on herself. So there's really no need for the film to pass further judgment, right? She's not standing there saying I didn't do it. She's just saying I really don't know why I did it. Like not even a drunk idiot would do what I did. And a big question the movie asks is like, what is a mother? In other words, how do you become a mother based on the mother that you've already had? And how does your own history with your own mother basically affect the love you had for your child? And is this a history you can rewrite, right? Is there, like sometimes our past makes us believe that things are cyclical and, you know, we're kind of doomed to repeat. We're in a doom loop, right? Like things are just, we're basically destined to repeat the same cycles over and over again. Like how much control do you really have over these things? And with Black women in particular, right, they inherit these histories of violence, of silence. Laurence's mother seems to have been, you know, traumatized by her father when he left her for another woman to start a whole new life. And I think her experiences growing up and her experiences with Mr. Dumontet made her genuinely feel unworthy of being a mother. The decision to keep her child does suggest that she did have some maternal instincts. She did have the desire to like at least try having a child, but the lack of support from her lover and her family and this kind of isolation that she's internalized, it just kind of, she drowned in her own thoughts, right? She suffocated in her own anxieties, and you know, that level of isolation and loneliness, like, I mean, the end result is, it's not going to be good. And this feeling of, do I even have a right to be a mother, is something that Rama can greatly relate to. And her own relationship with her mother is what makes her believe that she might not be a great mom. Like even her partner is trying to console her, being like, listen, none of that is going to happen. You can't be afraid. And knowing where something comes from is the first step of knowing how to rid ourselves of it. And again, we don't get much glimpses into Rama's life, but from the videotapes that we see of her childhood, the flashbacks, Rama is someone who has always been watching her mother. And from what we see of her mother, you know, from the past and in the present, like there's something distant about her. There's something kind of, I'm not going to say cold, but there is something like, you can tell like she's dealing with a lot. And I think watching this trial allowed Rama to like contextualize her mother and kind of see that whatever was going on, it goes beyond her relationship to her, right? Like there's other things at play, and there's kind of a bigger picture here. And so before leaving the courtroom, Laurence turns to Rama and gives her a smile. And I couldn't tell if that smile was real or fake, right? Was that a figment of Rama's imagination? And that was the moment where, you know, she gazed into the abyss, it looked her dead in the eye, and she ran out, right? It was like, I am not about to be suffocated by my own thoughts, my own anxieties. She got so sick of being in her own head that she just had to get out of there. I think it was that moment, that smile, that made her realize that, you know, whatever darkness is inside of her, it doesn't have to consume her, right? It doesn't have to win. It doesn't have to take over. Like, she does have more control over this than maybe she would like to believe. And so she leaves the courtroom, and the movie ends with Rama at her mother's flat, putting things in the cupboards, and she's just sitting alone with her, right? Like, from what we saw of Rama's sort of relationship to her mother, she wasn't someone that was comfortable being alone with her mother. But in this case, she just kind of sits next to her as her mother rests. And there's kind of she kind of accepts what she cannot change. And she comes to believe that maybe she does have more control over her future than her past would make her believe. That's the point of the film. Like, whatever happened in the past, like, of course it's going to shape your future, but again, knowing and understanding it might allow you to regain some control and change that sort of direction. Overall, I think this movie is a modern classic. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.